I have never spliced a single branch onto myself. Not one. Not you. Not the ones who came before you. Not the ones still to come. So here is the question I actually want you to sit with right now before we go any further. Where do you think the joint is? You have spent so many mornings running your hand down your own arm, searching for it. The place where you were fastened on, the knot, the graft line, the seam where your wood was tied to mine, because somebody told you that belonging is a thing that gets tied and can just as easily come untied. You believed it. You have been checking that knot for years. I am the vine. That part you already know. You have heard it read aloud more times than you can count, in more rooms than you remember. But hearing a sentence and understanding what it is actually claiming are two different things. You heard, I am the vine, you are the branches, as an instruction. Hold on. Stay connected. Do not let go. As if the whole relationship were a grip you have to keep tightening with your own hand, hour after hour, or it slips. That was never what the sentence said. A vine does not tie its branches on. A vine grows them. A rope and a root are not the same thing, and you have been living as if you were the first one. Something someone looped around a trunk and cinched tight. Something that depends on the knot holding. Ropes fray. Ropes slip. Ropes need to be checked, tightened, replaced when the weather turns hard enough. Is that really what you think this is? Go on. Follow your own life back down its whole length, the actual shape of it, and tell me where you begin and I end. Tell me where the splice is. Take as long with it as you need. You will not find it. Not because it is hidden well, not because you have not looked hard enough or prayed long enough, or repented thoroughly enough to finally see it. You will not find it because it is not there. It was never there. There is no place on you where the joining happened, because nothing was ever joined. That is not poetry. That is the actual claim underneath the sentence you have been reciting your whole life without asking what it costs to be true. I know what you have been doing instead. Every day, sometimes several times a day, you take an inventory. Am I still close enough? Did I pray right this time? Did I read enough, feel enough, believe hard enough to keep the connection from slipping loose overnight? You wake up and check the knot before you have even opened your eyes all the way. You fall asleep, still checking it. And underneath all of that checking is a fear you have never said out loud, not even to yourself in the dark, that one day you will find the rope finally gave way, and nobody told you, and you are just lying there, cut off, and do not even know it yet. I'm not asking you to check less carefully. I am telling you there was never a knot to check. Stay with that a moment. Not as a comforting phrase to repeat when you feel far from me. As a fact about the actual wood you are made of. You did not get fastened to the vine the way a graft gets fastened to a trunk, waiting to see if it takes. You grew out of it. The life running in you, in this moment, hearing these words, is not borrowed from somewhere else and passed along through a connection that could fail. It is the same life. It never crossed a border to reach you. There was no border to cross. So put your hand down. Stop searching your own arm for the place where I attached you. There is nothing to find, and that is not bad news. That is the whole of it. Before we are finished here, you need to understand exactly why the seam you have spent your life guarding was never there to begin with, and what that means for every single time you thought you had come loose. Let me name the actual weight of it, because you have been carrying it so long, you have stopped noticing the shape of it on your back. You wake up, and the first thing your mind does, before it does anything else, is check. Not check the day. Check the connection. Am I still in? Did last night's failure loosen something? Did the short temper in the car, the prayer you rushed through half asleep, the hour you spent scrolling instead of reading, did any of that work the knot free while you were not paying attention? You run through it fast, almost without noticing you are doing it, the way a tongue keeps finding a chipped tooth. And only once the audit comes back clean enough do you let yourself relax into the day. for an hour, maybe 2. Then you start again. This is exhausting in a way you have never fully said out loud, because it does not look like exhaustion from the outside. It looks like devotion. People might even call it discipline, call it a tender conscience, call it taking your faith seriously. But underneath the language of devotion is a much older, much heavier question running on a loop. Am I still attached, or did I finally do the thing that cuts a branch loose? You have built a whole private scoring system around it. Prayers logged, scripture read, tempers held, kindnesses done. Every one of them a small deposit against the fear, proof filed away for the day someone, maybe even you, comes looking for proof that you belong on this vine, and not lying somewhere in a pile waiting to be burned. You check the leaves the way a farmer checks for blight. Is the color still good? Is there any curling at the edges? Any sign that yesterday's failure has started to show? And here is the part that never gets said plainly enough. You compare. You look at branches that seem to be thriving without half this much checking, fuller, greener, closer in somehow, and you assume they simply tied the knot better than you did. Tighter, earlier, with more competence than you have ever managed. You do not know their private audit. You only see the fruit hanging where yours looks thin, and you read it as a verdict on how well they have held on and how poorly you have. None of this is laziness. None of this is a lack of love for me. It is fear wearing the clothes of faithfulness, and it has been running your mornings for longer than you can remember. You check because somewhere, a long time ago, you came to believe that being loved by me was a status that could lapse, that it needed renewing, that it was, underneath the language of grace, still a transaction you had to keep making good on, one clean day at a time, one honest prayer at a time, terrified that the ledger might close on you while you were looking the other way. I want you to feel how tiring that actually is before I say anything else. Not to shame you for it. To name it accurately, once, out loud, so we are finally talking about the real thing instead of the version of it you have gotten used to living inside. You have been standing watch over a length of wood that was never going to split. You have been checking a knot every single morning of your life, and you have never once, not one single time, found it coming loose. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself why that is? Not because you tie it well, because there was nothing there to come loose in the first place. That is where I want to take you next. Not to comfort you about the knot, to show you it was never there. I want to ask you something else now, and I want you to actually answer it instead of moving past it the way you move past most questions I ask. Where did you learn this? Not the theology, the feeling underneath it. Where did you first learn that belonging is provisional, that it can be granted and then quietly withdrawn, that you have to keep earning the thing you thought you already had? You did not invent that feeling on your own. Nobody does. You picked it up somewhere, the way a coat picks up the smell of a room it hung in too long, and you have been wearing it ever since without remembering exactly where you got it. Maybe it was a team, a group, a table you were allowed to sit at as long as you kept performing whatever it was that had earned you the seat in the first place. Nobody announced the rule out loud. Nobody had to. You simply understood, the way children understand things without being told, that this kind of belonging came with strings attached, and those strings could change, and nobody would warn you before they did. Maybe it was smaller than that. A silence that followed a mistake. A version of affection that got noticeably warmer when you performed well and noticeably cooler when you did not, so quietly that you could never quite prove it was happening, only feel it, the way you feel a room's temperature change before you can name why. You learned to read the weather of it. You got good at reading it. Too good, honestly, for a child who should have been allowed to simply exist without running that kind of forecast every day. So by the time you came to me, you already had the instrument built. The one that checks. The one that scans a relationship for signs of coming trouble, that treats warmth as something to be managed rather than trusted, that assumes underneath every welcome there is a catch waiting to surface eventually. You did not choose to bring that instrument with you. You simply had it, the same way you had a pulse, and you pointed it at me, because it was the only tool you had ever been given for reading whether you belonged somewhere. That is where the not came from. Not from anything I ever said, from every provisional belonging you survived before you ever heard my name, stitched together into a single quiet belief. Love like this has to be maintained, or it lapses. Attachment like this has to be checked, or it slips. You brought your whole history of conditional rooms into the one relationship that was never built the way any of those rooms were built. And you have been reading me through that old instrument ever since, waiting for the temperature to change. It never does. Not because I am patient in the way a very tolerant person is patient, gritting through your failures until his patience finally runs dry. That is still the old instrument talking, still measuring me against thresholds I did not set. Nothing changes here because no threshold was ever set. I did not tie you on the day you finally proved something. I did not adopt you the way a stranger adopts a stray, conditional on good behavior going forward. You were not taken in on approval, the way a room takes someone in and keeps the option to change its mind. You grew here, before the conditional rooms, before the coat that picked up their smell, before you learned to read a temperature or manage a welcome. Whatever taught you that belonging comes with fine print was teaching you about people, and people can be like that. Some of them, through no real fault of their own, worn thin themselves, passing on the only kind of belonging they were ever shown. But you were reading a very old wound onto a page that never had that wound written into it in the first place. So when you catch yourself checking again, checking me the way you learned to check everyone else, I want you to notice what you are actually doing. You are running a very old scan on a room built completely differently than the ones that taught it to you. The scan does not fit here. It never did. Before I go there, let me show you something about the room itself. Because you have been assuming its care for you, started the day you finally proved something, and that is not when it started at all. Before I take you any further, look at something you have walked past 100 times without noticing what it actually meant. Picture the hillside again. Not the vine yet. Before the vine. A man walks the slope with his hands empty, deciding where the rows will go, and then he builds two things that have nothing to do with grapes. A tower, tall enough to see the whole field from, built for eyes that will watch over growth that does not exist yet, and lower down, cut straight into the rock, a press. A place built for crushing fruit that has not grown a single cell. Stop there. Ask yourself the obvious question. Why build a press before there is anything to press? You would not do it. Not this early. You wait for proof. You wait to see if the vine takes, if the first cluster forms, if the whole project is even going to work, and only then do you spend the labor on a place to process what came of it. That is how you plan. That is how most planning works. Evidence first, investment after. He did not build that way. The tower went up while the ground was still bare dirt. The press was cut into stone, while the vine was a scattering of cuttings not yet rooted. Nothing had happened yet that would justify either one. No harvest to defend, no fruit to crush, just a decision made in advance that this ground was going to produce something worth all of it. Feel what that means for you, specifically. You have spent your whole life assuming the order runs the other way. First you perform. Then, if the performance holds up, the structure gets built around you. The trust, the closeness, the sense that you belong here without qualification. You have been waiting your entire life to earn the tower, to earn the press. As if care like that only shows up once there is fruit worth caring about. That was never how this vineyard was built. Not this one. The watching came first, before you had anything worth watching. The tower was not raised because your first cluster of grapes turned out well. It was raised while the whole hillside was still stones and turned soil, and nothing you could point to and call a harvest. Somebody built a place to watch you long before you gave anyone a reason to. and the press. Think about what a press is actually for. It is built to take something whole and pull the good out of it, crush the fruit down until what is worth keeping runs free of what is not. That kind of place does not get built on a whim. It gets built by someone who is already certain, before the first grape ever forms, that there is going to be something in you worth that kind of attention. You keep waiting to become worth the investment. Here is what you have not let yourself hear yet. The investment already happened. It happened before there was any fruit to justify it. The tower is already standing. The press is already cut. Nobody is waiting on you to prove the ground was worth clearing. I know what this brushes up against. You want to ask what happens if the fruit never comes, if the grapes never fill, if the years pass and the press just sits there empty, cut into rock for nothing. I am not going to pretend that fear is foolish. It is old. It runs deep. It has followed you into more mornings than you have ever admitted out loud. But look again at what actually got built, and when. Nobody puts that kind of labor into stone for a maybe. A press cut into rock is not a guess. It is not hedged. It was not built small in case the vine failed, built cheap in case the investment was wasted. It was built the way you build something you already consider settled. The only thing left open was the timing, never the outcome. So carry this with you into whatever comes next. Whatever it is you have been trying to earn, the closeness, the confidence, the sense that you have finally done enough to deserve the care you have been given. You were never earning the tower. It was already standing before you arrived on the hillside. You were never earning the press. It was already cut, waiting for fruit that had not yet grown a single cell. You did not build any of this. You grew into ground somebody else prepared for you first. Now I want to talk about the exposed parts of your life, because if you have guarded a knot this long, you have probably wondered something else too. Could it be cut, on purpose, by someone, by a season hard enough to finish what your own failures never quite managed? Here is what I need you to understand about that. A rope can be cut. That is what a rope is. Two separate things, held at a point that can come apart again, under enough pressure, pointed the right way, long enough. You have been living as though your life with me were held together at exactly that kind of point. A place pressure could finally reach, a place that could finally give. Wood does not work that way. You cannot cut a branch off at a place it was never joined. There is no seam for the blade to find. Pressure can bend a branch. Storms can strip its leaves, snap its smaller shoots, batter it until it looks nothing like it did in the calm. But the wood underneath does not have a seam in it. Nothing there for the wind to work loose. Nothing was ever tied. This is why you have survived every season you were certain would be the one. Not because you fought harder than the pressure. The pressure did not aim at a joint that could give. It was aimed at wood. Wood bends. Wood suffers. Wood sometimes looks half destroyed by the time a storm passes, but it does not detach. Detachment needs two pieces. There were never two pieces here. Do something with me now. It will only take a moment. Lift your eyes. Wherever you are, find the place the light is actually coming from. A window, a lamp, a screen, the sun through a gap in the curtain. It does not matter which. Look toward it, just for a few seconds. Instead of down at your own hands the way you have been looking this whole time, that is what a branch does. It does not grow by staring at its own bark. It does not catalog every mark last season's storm left behind. It turns toward the light and keeps growing, and the growing itself becomes the proof. You have spent so much energy checking the wood for signs of coming apart that you have barely looked up at what the wood is actually for. Life does not run backward into you from your own vigilance. It runs into you from the light, the same way it always has, whether or not you remembered to check anything at all. Your protection was never about your grip. It was never about how tightly you held on through the hard seasons, how well you performed faith while everything shook. A branch does not protect itself by holding harder. It is protected because it cannot, by its own structure, become what it is not. A separate thing, tied to a source it might lose one day. It can bend. It can be pruned back hard. It can look for a season like it is barely holding a single leaf, but it cannot come apart at a joint that does not exist, no matter how long the wind searches for one. So lift your eyes again, just once more before we move on. Not to check anything this time, just to notice where the light has actually been coming from this whole time. You were looking down at your own hands instead. You were never guarding your place here. There was no place that needed guarding, only a branch that needed to keep facing the light the way it was built to, long before it ever learned to be afraid of the wind. But if there is no place that needs guarding, you still have a question, and I am not going to pretend you don't. Why does the gardener still come with a blade? You have seen him come, maybe not with your eyes, but you have felt it. A season where something got taken, cut clean, and you were left standing there holding the stub of it, wondering what that says about you. If nothing can come loose, why does anything ever come off? Here is what you have not watched closely enough to notice. There are two different things that blade does. They are not the same motion. Dead wood comes off without ceremony. No pause. No angle checked twice. No second look at the cut. No wondering if it was the right branch. Dead wood is gray before the blade ever touches it. Brittle. Already speaking for itself. The gardener takes it in one motion and does not look back at the place it came from, because there was no argument to have with a piece of wood that was never going anywhere again. Living wood is a completely different conversation. He stands over it. He turns it. He looks at where it is running. He follows the line back toward the trunk before he decides anything. He is not deciding whether to keep it. He already kept it. That decision happened the moment he planted the vine at all. He is deciding where the cut goes. That is not the same question. It is not a small thing. You have been reading every cut as a verdict on whether you belong here. That was not what a cut like that was measuring. Think about what actually gets removed when a vine is pruned well. Not the fruit, never the fruit. What comes off is the growth that ran sideways instead of forward. The extra shoot that looked impressive climbing along the wire, green, fast, full of itself. It spent everything the root sent up on leaf and length. None of it went toward anything that could ripen. Left alone, that shoot would have kept climbing. It would have looked, to anyone walking past, like the healthiest branch on the whole vine. And it would have produced nothing. All its strength went into growing, none of it into bearing. That is what the blade actually goes looking for. Not weakness, not failure. Growth that has nowhere useful to go. I know what this sounds like from where you are standing. So let me say the next part plainly, because it matters more than the last part did. The wound is real. I'm not telling you the cut doesn't hurt. I'm not telling you it should not have felt like loss. It did take something. A version of you that was busy and visible and climbing. One day it simply was not there anymore. The bare place where it had been stayed bare for longer than felt fair. You were allowed to grieve that. Grief is not proof you misread what happened. But grief and detachment are not the same wound. You have been carrying them as if they were. A shoot taken off at the joint is not a branch cut loose from the vine. It never was the branch. It was this year's overgrowth on a branch that is still exactly as attached as it was before the blade ever came near it. Still made of the same wood, still running the same sap, still incapable of coming apart at a seam that does not exist anywhere on it. What got shortened was not your place here. What got shortened was the distance between you and the part of you that was actually going to bear something. So ask the question again. Now that you have watched the whole motion, not just the moment it stung, ask it once more. Does the gardener come to a dead branch this carefully? Does he stand over it, turn it, study where it runs, choose the angle with this much attention? He does not. He has not once. The care itself was the answer the whole time. You were just too busy flinching to notice which branch it was being spent on. There is one more thing about that blade you have not asked yet. It matters more than the ones you have. When does the gardener come? You picture him showing up in the middle of a good season, leaves out, fruit forming, the vine at its fullest, most visible self, and then, right there in the middle of it, the blade arrives and takes something. That is the picture that makes the cut feel like a verdict, like he looked at your best moment, decided it needed correcting. That is not when he comes. He comes in the bare season, the cold one, the one where there is no leaf on the whole vine, nothing green anywhere, nothing you would ever call fruit or growth or progress. He comes when the wood looks, to anyone walking past, like it might already be dead. That is the season a vine gets pruned. Not the fruiting one, the empty one. Sit with that. It changes everything about what the blade is actually measuring. If the cut came during the fullest season, you could read it as a response, a grade given for a harvest just produced, something earned or failed right there in front of him. But it does not come then. It comes when there is nothing to grade, no fruit hanging anywhere to compare against another vine's fruit, no green to admire or withhold admiration from, just bare wood, standing still, in weather too hard for anything to be growing at all. He is not responding to your output. There is no output in that season. Nobody's is. He is not measuring what you produced this year against what you produced last year, because in the season he comes, nothing is being produced by anyone, on any branch, anywhere on the hillside. The blade moves through bare wood, on a bare vine, in a bare season. You have spent years assuming it was a report card. It was never a report card. It cannot be. You cannot grade a season that has nothing in it to grade. Think about what this means for the emptiest stretch of your life right now, the one where nothing seems to be growing, where you cannot point to fruit, cannot point to progress, cannot show anyone a single leaf and say, look, this proves something. You have been treating that emptiness as evidence against you, as the season where the verdict finally comes due, because there is nothing left standing between you and the truth of how little you have grown. That is exactly backward. The bare season is not when the reckoning happens. It is when the work happens that nothing visible could ever hold. Roots move in that season, deeper than the year before, and nobody watching the surface would know it. Wood strengthens too, underground, unseen. The gardener is not waiting for you to produce something worth his attention before he gives it. He is doing his most careful work in exactly the stretch where you assumed he had looked away. Think about what that means for the way you have been reading your own quiet stretches. The months where prayer felt flat. The season where nothing you tried seemed to take. You called that abandonment. You called it proof the connection had gone thin, the way you have called so many other things proof of the same fear. But a bare vine in the cold is not an abandoned vine. It is a vine being worked on in the one season nobody else is watching closely enough to notice. This is why the timing of the cut was never about your current fruit. It could not have been. There was no current fruit in the room when the decision got made. What he was cutting was never a judgment on what you had just shown him. It was preparation for a growing season that had not started yet. Work done in the dark, on your behalf, before there was anything visible to reward or punish. So the next time you find yourself in a season with nothing to show, no fruit, no green, no evidence you can point to and call proof of anything. Stop reading it as the silence before a verdict. That silence is not empty the way you think it is. It is the exact season the careful work gets done. It was never waiting on your harvest to begin. It never needed one. There is a season after the cut that nobody warns you about. The bare place stays bare. Nothing rushes in to cover it. You wake up morning after morning. The spot is exactly what it was the day before. Plain wood, no new shoot showing. Meanwhile, the branch, 2 feet over, is already thick with leaf, already doing whatever it is that leaves and branches do to look like they are thriving. You start comparing again. Not the old comparison, not the one about who tied their knot tighter. A new one, who healed faster, who the gardener clearly favors. Look how fast their bare place closed. Look how long yours has stayed open. I want to slow you down right there. That comparison is measuring the wrong thing altogether. Growth toward leaf is fast and it is loud. You can watch it happen almost in real time. Green pushing out day by day, something to point at. Growth toward fruit does not work that way. It never has. It happens low. It happens quiet. For a long stretch, it does not look like anything is happening at all. The plant is not stalled in that season. It is not being punished. It has not been set aside while the gardener attends to branches he likes better. Something is moving. It is only moving somewhere you cannot see. Not from where you are standing. Not while you are looking at bark. You want a date for when the bare place closes. I understand that. I am not going to give you one. I want to tell you honestly why. It is not because I am withholding it. It is not some test of your patience. A date would turn the waiting into the very thing I am trying to take off of you. You would start counting days instead of resting in wood. You would check the calendar the way you used to check the knot. The checking would just move house from your arm to a page. Nothing underneath it would actually be different, so no date. Only this. The bare place is not a wound that is still open. It is a wound that already closed the moment the cut was made. Closed the way bark always closes. Quietly, from the inside. Long before anything shows on the outside. What you are looking at is not an injury still bleeding. It is new wood, doing new wood things. Which mostly means doing nothing anyone can see yet. This is the piece that matters most. You keep looking at that bare place for a seam. Proof that this is where you finally came apart. Where the cutting went too deep and found the joint you always suspected was hiding on you. Keep looking as long as you want. You will only find bark deciding what to grow next. No seam under it. No place where the wood turns into something less attached. Something you have to worry might come the rest of the way off. Just wood, resting, doing what wood does between one season and the next. Think back to what actually gets cut. Never the branch. Only the growth that was spending your strength somewhere it could not ripen. The gardener did not aim the blade at your place on the vine. He aimed it at the one thing standing between you and the part of your life that was actually going to bear something. Something worth the name. That is not rejection wearing a sharp edge. That is attention. Spent on you, specifically, on purpose. By someone who does not waste a single cut on wood he has already decided to let go of. So let the bare place stay bare as long as it needs to. It was not the sign you thought it was. It is not the mark of a branch coming loose. It is the mark of a branch worth returning to, worth standing over, worth choosing the angle for, with that much care. Nothing about how long the bark takes to close changes what was true about you the whole time the blade was moving. There is a sentence I said once that has been read for so long as an instruction that almost nobody stops to ask what it is actually describing. I want to slow down and read it with you exactly as it was said. John chapter 15, verse 5. I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me ye can do nothing. Most people stop at abideth. Stay, remain, hold your position. That is where the checking comes from. The whole exhausting architecture of it. A command to keep doing something moment by moment or risk losing your place. But look again. There is a smaller word doing the actual work in that sentence. Not abideth. In. He that abideth in me and I in him. Think about what that word is claiming. In is not a word for nearness. Nearness has a gap in it, however small, and a gap is a place a knot could go, a place something could be tied. You can stand near a fire and still be a separate thing from the fire. You can stand in a fire and there is no longer a meaningful line between where the fire ends and you begin. In describes something past adjacency. It describes shared substance. Not two things touching. One thing. Continuous. No boundary running through the middle where a rope could be looped. And I did not stop it one way. I said it twice, on purpose, both ways at once. In me, and I in him. Not you reaching toward me, hoping the reach holds. Not me tolerating your presence nearby as long as you behave well enough to stay welcome. Both movements at the same time, describing one single fact from two sides. That is what it takes to describe wood instead of rope. Rope only needs one side tied. Wood does not have sides at all. This is what the branch actually is. Not a visitor granted proximity. Not a guest whose welcome depends on good behavior. A continuation. The sap does not pause at some border and ask if it can keep flowing into you. There is no border for it to pause at. What is true of the vine is already true of the branch. What is true of a trunk is true of every inch of wood running out from it, all the way to the smallest shoot at the very end, still carrying the identical life, unbroken, because it was never a separate substance to begin with. That is the whole claim underneath. Without me ye can do nothing. Not a threshold you might fail to clear on a bad day. Not a warning about the minimum effort needed to stay attached. A statement about what a branch literally is, apart from the vine, which is nothing. A branch is not a separate object positioned near a vine. It is what the vine's own life looks like at that point, stretched out into leaf and fruit. Take the wood away and there is no branch left to speak of. Not a weakened branch. Not a struggling branch. No branch. It was always this, an extension, not an attachment. And notice what kind of fruit the sentence names. This is not a harvest you sell. Nothing you gather and stack somewhere to prove the season went well. The fruit here is what the life in the wood becomes visible as further out. Patience where there used to be none. A kindness that costs you something and gets given anyway. A steadiness under pressure that is not your own manufacture, because it is coming through you from somewhere older than your own effort. That is the only harvest this sentence is describing. Not a bank account, not a breakthrough with a date on it. Character and presence grown the way fruit actually grows, quietly, from wood that was already alive, never forced. So go back to the search you have been running for years. Go back to the knot, the graft line, the seam you have been checking every morning before you let yourself rest. Look for it now, with this in your hands. Look for the seam. There isn't one. There was never one. Not because you finally earned its removal, not because enough good days wore it smooth, because the sentence you have been living inside your entire life was never describing two things held together. It was describing one thing, spoken of from two sides, so that neither side could ever be mistaken for a rope. There is one more piece of that sentence I want to go back to. You have probably heard it too, and heard it wrong, in one exact way. Without me ye can do nothing. Most people who know that line know it as a warning. Get out, and you have got nothing. Drift far enough. Stop showing up enough. Let your prayers go thin enough, and one day you will find yourself trying to run on your own strength and coming up empty. And that emptiness will be the proof you finally left. It gets quoted at people standing at the edge, like a fence with a sign on it. Turn back now, or this is what waits for you out there. Hear the sentence again. Slower this time. Notice who it is actually talking about. The word without was not aimed at someone standing outside, deciding whether to come in. Look at who the sentence had already named by the time it gets there. The one bearing fruit. The one already described 2 clauses earlier as in, not near, not approaching, not deciding, in. The same continuous substance this whole message has been about. That last clause, the one about being able to do nothing on your own, is not a threat held out to that person. It is a fact told to them, about themselves, so they stop looking in the wrong place for their own source. Here is what that actually means, and it is the opposite of what you have been bracing for. It was never a warning about what happens if you leave. It is a plain description of what was always true while you stayed. You were never able to generate your own life, not on your own, not out of your own effort, not even on your best day, your most disciplined week, your quietest and steadiest morning. Not because you were failing at it, because that was not a thing a branch was built to do. No branch anywhere on any vine has ever produced its own sap. Not one, not the strongest one. You have spent years trying to prove yourself an exception to a sentence that was never testing for exceptions. Some days you gritted through it. More effort, a harder push. As if enough of your own strength, applied hard enough, could finally manufacture the fruit yourself, could turn the nothing the sentence promised into something you made. Other days, you did the opposite. You simply believed the nothing had already happened, that you had slipped past the edge of without noticing, and whatever you were producing now did not actually count, because somewhere back there, the connection had quietly failed, and nobody had told you. Both of those are the same mistake, worn 2 different ways. Both treat without me as a border you might be standing on the wrong side of. It was never a border. It was not a status that could shift depending on your mourning. It is what is permanently true of every branch there is, even the ones bearing the most fruit anyone has ever seen. What they are producing did not originate with them, could not have, was never going to, no matter how hard they gripped, no matter how far they thought they had drifted. So the next time that sentence comes back to frighten you, and it will, because fear like that does not quit after one good answer, do not hear it as a countdown to what happens if you finally slip. Hear it the way it was actually spoken, to the one already in, about what was always true of the wood underneath, not a threat about the door, a fact about the sap. You were never going to be your own source. You were not supposed to be. Needing the vine this completely was not the failure you have been quietly grading yourself on. Now let me speak to the part of you that just heard all of that and quietly filed an exception for yourself. You know the part I mean. The voice that says, fine, maybe that is true for people raised inside this. People who never had a season of walking away. People who never came to this late, half-convinced, carrying a whole other life behind them like luggage they could not fully set down. Surely, that voice says, my situation is different. Surely I am the one branch here that actually was tied on from outside. I remember arriving. I remember being somewhere else first. I want to take that seriously, not brush past it. It is the last place the old fear has left to hide. Long before any of this, there is a picture of a vineyard, told the way a story gets told about someone who loves the ground he is standing on. A hillside, cleared by hand. Stones carried off, one at a time. The best vine there was, planted into soil that had been worked and turned, and made ready for it. Not because the ground demanded it, because the one planting it wanted the growing to be good, from the very start. Nobody in that picture is standing at a fence, tying loose cuttings onto a frame, hoping they take. Someone is on his knees in the dirt, planting. That is the picture underneath everything I have been telling you. A vineyard is not a structure you get attached to. It is ground you grow out of. And if you are certain you are the exception, cut from a whole different tree, carried in late by hands that were not yours, then look at what actually becomes of that beginning. It does not stay adjoining. It stops being one. Ask anyone who has done this with their hands. In the first weeks there is a visible line, a scar where two pieces of wood were bound together, a place you could point to and say, here, this is where the joining happened. But if the graft holds, if the life on both sides is real, that line does not stay a line forever. The wood grows through it. Sap moves across it, both directions, until the two pieces are no longer meaningfully two pieces. Cut the branch open a few seasons later, and you will not find a border. You will find wood, just wood, indistinguishable from the trunk it grew into. Same rings, same grain, running the same direction. So if you are one who came to me late, if you remember a different tree you used to belong to, a season where you were, by any honest account, cut off from the root completely, hear this clearly. Whatever line existed at the beginning does not have to stay a line. It was never meant to. The whole design of a graft is that it stops being a graft. The wound heals into wood. The place where you were brought in becomes, given enough seasons of real life moving through it, completely indistinguishable from every branch that never had to be brought in at all. You are not the guest branch, not permanently marked as different, not tolerated at the edge of the vine because someone was generous enough to let you in once. There is no edge. There is no scar tissue keeping score of how you got here. If the life is real, and it is because you would not still be hearing these words with your whole chest if it were not, then the line closed a long time ago, the way every real graft closes. What remains is not a joined thing anymore. It is one thing. Root, trunk, the old branches and you. No seam left standing anywhere. The wind can search it, your own memory can search it, and whatever wants to pull at it can search it too. There is only grain running the same direction. The past you carried in did not disqualify the wood. It only meant your piece of it started somewhere else, before it became, fully and without asterisk, this. Go back with me once more to that hillside. The stones cleared off by hand. The best vine there was, the one everybody agreed was the finest choice, planted into ground that had been worked and turned until it was ready. A tower built to watch over it. A press already cut into the rock in advance, before there was a single grape to put in it. Because the one who planted this vineyard was not hoping it would go well, he was certain. He had done everything a grower could possibly do, and he had done it first, before he needed to, because that is what wanting something to thrive actually looks like. I told you what that picture was underneath everything else. Ground you grow out of, not a structure you get attached to. That part is still true, but I left something out on purpose, because you were not ready to hear it yet. I think you are now. The vineyard gave wild grapes. Sit with that for a second. It should unsettle you more than it probably does on first hearing. Everything was right. The soil, the vine itself, the finest one available, nothing second-rate about it. The care, constant, expert, exactly what a vineyard like that would have needed. Everything anyone could name for good fruit was met, fully, by someone who wanted the growing to succeed more than anyone standing in that vineyard ever could have wanted it. And what came up was small, sour, wrong, not nothing. Fruit. Just fruit going in a direction nobody planted it to go. There is a moment in that old picture where the grower himself stops and asks a question out loud, standing in the middle of everything he built with his own hands. What more was there to do here that I have not already done? Not an accusation thrown outward. A real question, asked by someone who genuinely cannot find the gap. He is not angry the way a stranger gets angry over a bad deal. He is grieved the way you are grieved when you have given everything you had to give, and it still was not enough to explain what came up out of the ground. Feel the size of that for a moment, because you have been assuming something for a long time that this picture quietly takes apart. You have been assuming that if you came from the right place, raised in it, taught it early, did not wander anywhere else, did the whole thing the way you were supposed to from the very start, the fruit would simply follow. That being native to the vineyard was itself some kind of guarantee. Here is a vineyard with every advantage there was to have, tended by hands that cleared the ground themselves, watered, watched, waited on, and it produced grapes nobody wanted to eat. So whatever guarantee you were counting on, it was not that one. Being planted in the right soil by the right hands has never by itself been the mechanism. If it were, this vineyard would not have a single sour grape hanging anywhere on it. Something else was always turning that sap into something worth calling fruit. It was never simply where the vine had been planted. It was never how good the soil under it was. It was never how long the roots had been growing there, or how many generations had tended that same patch of hill before you ever arrived on it. That should not make you afraid. I know how it lands at first, as if I just took away the one thing you thought you could stand on, being raised right, having done the work early. I am not taking it away to leave you with nothing. I am taking it away because you were not supposed to be standing on it in the first place, and something sturdier than pedigree has been holding you the entire time you thought it was that. Hold that thought exactly where it is. Do not resolve it yet. I'm not finished with the picture, and the second half of it is going to surprise you even more than the first half did. Before I show you the second half, I want to make sure you actually understand the first half. Wild grapes are not what most people picture when they hear the phrase. You imagine bare vines, empty branches, nothing hanging where fruit should be. That is not it at all. Wild grapes means the vine produced. It worked hard. It was not lazy, not dead, not neglected. It grew. It fruited. The fruit came in exactly the shape the vine chose to grow it in. Small, sour, wrong. The tragedy was never absence. The tragedy was direction. Hear that carefully, because this is closer to your own fear than the fear of having nothing at all. You are not afraid of producing nothing. You get up. You show up. You keep the disciplines. You do the reading, the praying, the trying, morning after morning. Something is clearly happening in your life because of it. What frightens you, quietly, on the days you are honest about it, is a different question. What if what I am producing is the wrong shape? What if this whole vineyard of effort is real, is growing, is not dead, and is still, somehow, coming in sour? This connects to something I already told you, so you do not miss how it ties together. The fruit this whole message has been describing was not a harvest you sell, not a breakthrough with a date stapled to it, not a bank account, not a title, not a life that finally looks impressive to the people watching. Patience where there used to be none. A kindness that costs you something and gets given anyway. A steadiness under pressure that is not your own manufacture. That is the only fruit this was ever measuring. So when you fear the wrong shape, look again. What shape have you actually been growing toward? Performance instead of patience. Image instead of kindness. A steadiness you fake in front of people, instead of one that is actually holding you up when nobody is looking. That is what wild grapes are, in a life instead of on a hillside. Not absence, substitution, real effort, real growth, aimed at the wrong target the whole way through. Because somewhere back at the root of it, the driving question was, never am I bearing fruit. It was, am I proving something? And a vine driven by proving something will always, eventually come in sour. No matter how much soil it was given, no matter how early it was planted, no matter how good the ground. You already know what a vine like that feels like from the inside. You have lived a season or two of it yourself. Busy, tired in a way that has nothing to do with laziness, doing more, if anything, than most of the branches around you. More praying, more reading, more showing up early and staying late, more of every visible discipline anyone could point to. And underneath all of it, quiet, not quite named out loud, a low current of dread. That none of it is landing where it is supposed to land. That the fruit is coming in, technically, and still tastes like something is off. That is not laziness wearing a disguise. That is a root drawing from the wrong current, working overtime to make up for it. This next part should actually loosen something in your chest instead of tighten it further. None of that sourness is fixed by trying harder in the same direction. A vine driven by proving does not correct itself with more effort. More effort just grows more of the same wrong shape, faster. What changes the fruit is not the labor, it is the current, where the sap is actually coming from, what it is actually running toward when it gets to you. That is the whole weight of the first half of the picture. Now here is where it turns. I need you to hold on to something you almost certainly have never put next to this vineyard before. There's another picture further along in the same story, told from the completely opposite side. Not a vine that had everything and still went wrong. A branch that had nothing, no native standing in that soil at all, no history on that hillside, cut from a completely different tree. And somehow, against every expectation, the first picture would have set up for you, produced fruit nobody expected. I promised you this would surprise you. Here is why. If nativity were the mechanism, this branch should have failed before it ever took. It did not have the one thing that Hillside Vineyard had in overwhelming supply, and it bore fruit anyway. Picture this branch honestly, because it had nothing going for it that the tended vineyard had in abundance. It came from a wild tree, not tended, not cultivated, not planted by anyone's hand or watched over by anyone's care, growing wherever wild things grow, on ground nobody cleared and nobody watered on purpose. It has no memory of this soil, no claim to it. It was not here first. It was not here early. Everyone else standing in rows along that hillside had a history in the ground that this branch simply does not have, and will not have, and cannot manufacture no matter how long it stays. And it gets grafted in anyway, cut from where it was, set into a wound in the cultivated tree, right where a native branch used to be. And through that wound, something crosses over that has nothing to do with the branch's own record, the root. The rich sap running underneath everything that every branch on that tree draws from, regardless of where it started. Here is the sentence worth holding on to. This branch does not partake of its own fatness. It partakes of the roots. Hear that again if you need to. The richness moving through it was not its own to begin with, not earned across seasons, not built up through years of belonging, not something it brought with it from the wild tree it used to be part of. It arrived with nothing to contribute to the exchange but a wound willing to be joined. Everything else came from the root, the same root every branch on that tree was always drawing from, the ones planted there generations back included. Now put the two pictures side by side, because this is the whole point of showing you both. One vineyard had everything a vine could ask for, the best soil, the best care, roots already deep in that exact ground for as long as anyone could remember, and it produced fruit nobody wanted. One branch had nothing a branch could ask for, no native standing, no history, no claim on the ground it was set into, and it produced fruit worth the name. If the mechanism ran on nativity, the vineyard should have been flawless, and the grafted branch should have failed before it ever took. Neither of those things happened. The vineyard with everything went wrong. The branch with nothing went right. So the variable was never nativity in either direction. Not for the vine that had all of it, and not for the branch that had none of it. Whatever you have been quietly measuring yourself against, how early you arrived, how long you have belonged, how deep your roots supposedly go compared to someone else's, none of that was ever the mechanism producing the fruit. It did not decide anything on either hillside, in either story. I know exactly which of these two you have been afraid you are. Maybe you are the one who arrived late, wild-rooted, certain your history disqualifies you from the fruit the native branches seem to produce without trying. Maybe you are the opposite, raised in it from the beginning, doing everything the way you were taught. quietly terrified that your fruit keeps coming in wrong despite every advantage you were handed. Both fears are answered by the same root, not your origin, not your record. The sap that you were never able to manufacture in the first place, moving the same way into every branch it reaches, wherever that branch happened to start. I want to go back to something and turn it over once more. You heard it and moved past it too fast the first time. The branch grafted in from the wild tree does not partake of its own fatness. It partakes of the roots. You heard that as a statement about where the sap comes from. It is. But it is also a statement about something else. Something you have never once let yourself actually believe. Not even after everything I have already shown you so far. Ask yourself a harder question than where the sap comes from. Ask who is holding whom. You have been living as though the answer were obvious, as though you were the one holding on, gripping, doing the work of staying attached, morning after morning. Sheer effort, vigilance, the way a hand holds a rope so it will not slip loose. You checked the knot because you assumed the weight of the whole relationship rested on your grip. Let go, even for a moment, and something would fall. That was never the arrangement. The root does not hang from the branch. Think about that plainly, the way you would think about any actual tree. A root does not depend on a branch to keep it fed, or alive, or rooted in the ground. It is the other way entirely. Every leaf, every inch of new wood, every piece of fruit that ever formed, none of that ran from branch to root. All of it ran from root to branch, the whole time, in one direction only. So when you pictured yourself holding on, gripping hard enough to keep from being lost, you had the picture backward. You were never the one doing the holding. You were the one being held the way a branch is held by wood it grew out of. Not the way a hand holds a rope it is afraid to drop. The grip you have been exhausting yourself to maintain was never load-bearing. It never had anything to carry. I know this is hard to fully take in. The fear underneath the checking was never really about theology. It was about weight. You believed that if you stopped gripping, even once, even briefly, the whole thing would come apart, and it would be your fault, because you were the one who let go. That fear only makes sense if you were the one doing the holding to begin with. You were not. Picture the root again, running deep under all of it, older than the branch, feeding it before the branch ever produced a single leaf worth naming. That root does not check whether the branch is gripping hard enough today. It does not need the branch's effort to keep functioning. It moves the way water moves downhill, without asking permission, without waiting for the branch to earn the next surge of it. The branch does not hold the root up. The root holds the branch up. It always has. This changes what all that checking was actually protecting. Nothing. There was nothing under your grip that needed your grip to survive. You can stop bracing now, the way you would stop straining to hold up something that was never resting on your arms in the first place. Put it down. It was never yours to carry. Think back to your own arm, the one you have spent so many mornings searching with your own fingers, looking for the place you thought you had been fastened on. You were checking the wrong thing the whole time. You were not checking for a knot. You were checking your grip, testing whether your own hold was still strong enough, still tight enough, still awake enough to keep the connection from failing overnight. As if the whole arrangement depended on how tightly you held something that had no need of your hand on it at all. Now think about the days your grip actually did fail. You know the ones. The morning, too tired to pray. The week of going through the motions, feeling nothing underneath them. The season you are not proud of, where your whole private audit simply stopped running because you had nothing left to run it with. Ask yourself honestly, did the root stop supplying anything during that stretch? Did the sap slow or hesitate or wait for your attention to come back online before it moved again? It did not. It could not. A root does not check whether the branch remembered to hold on today before it decides whether to keep feeding it. It was never waiting on your grip for permission. Your weakest season was still a held season. Your most exhausted stretch was still a carried one, held by something that was not measuring your effort at all. That is the part underneath the fatness, underneath the sap, underneath everything I have shown you about wood and grafting. Your strength was never what held the connection together. A root does not ask its branch to prove anything before it feeds it. It just feeds it. That is what it has been doing, quietly, under every check knot and every exhausted morning, long before you ever believed the work was yours to do. Neither of those fears was foolish to feel. They were both aimed at something real. The fruit matters. You were right to notice when yours felt off, whichever direction the ache came from. What I am correcting is not the noticing. It is where you went looking for the cause. You went looking in your history. How long you had been here, how well you had been taught, or how badly. How late you arrived compared to everyone else in the rows around you. That was not where the fruit came from. Not on either hillside, not in either story. It came from the root. It has only ever come from the root. A vineyard planted yesterday and a vineyard planted 100 years ago draw from the exact same current the moment their roots reach it. Neither one gets a head start on the sap because of how long they have been standing there. So put down the measuring, not the effort, the measuring. Keep showing up. Keep praying. Keep reading. Keep doing every ordinary faithful thing you have been doing, because none of this was ever an argument for doing less. It was an argument for stopping the audit underneath the doing. You do not have to trace your own history for proof that you qualify. You do not have to defend your arrival date, early or late, native or grafted, raised in it, or brought in from somewhere else altogether. None of that was ever what the root was checking before it let the sap through. Think for a moment about how much of your energy this measuring has quietly eaten. Not the effort itself. The effort was not the problem, and I'm not asking you to do less of it. The scoring underneath it. The part of you that clocks every act of faith and files it somewhere, comparing this month's harvest to last year's, comparing your fruit to the branch 2 feet over, running the numbers before you let yourself rest, even once. That is a second job you were not hired for. Nobody asked you to audit the sap on its way through you. You just started doing it quietly, the same way you started checking the knot. Because a mind trained to look for proof of belonging will find something to measure even after it has been told. Plainly, there is nothing left to prove. I want to say the actual promise plainly, because it is smaller than you expect and truer than anything bigger would have been. Not that your fruit will suddenly come in exactly the way you picture it. Not a harvest with a date on it. Not a guarantee that the ache you feel about your own life resolves on any given morning. Just this. The current running through you was never yours to generate. It was never withheld from you because of where you started. It runs the same direction through every branch on this vine, the ones tended from birth, and the ones grafted in last week. It has been running through you the entire time you were busy grading yourself against a measure that was never the real one. Native was never the requirement here. Flawless was never the requirement either. Both of those were always beside the point. There is one root, one sap, one current moving out into every branch it reaches, asking only to be let through, not earned, not proven, not measured against the branch that seems to be doing it better. Let it move. That is the whole of what a branch has ever been asked to do. On any hillside, in any story, from the very first vineyard someone planted with his own hands to the very last graft that will ever take. Put the blade and the root next to each other, just for a moment. I do not want you walking away confused, not with the two of them tangled into one idea. They are not the same thing. Mistaking one for the other is a mistake. It is exactly how the old fear finds a new door back in. The blade does not make the fruit. Hear that plainly. It would be so easy to trade one wrong mechanism for another, to stop thinking the knot was what held you here, and quietly start thinking the cutting is what produces you. It is not. The gardener's blade removes what is in the way. That is the whole of its job, the entire function it was ever built to serve. It clears the sideways growth. So the sap has somewhere honest to go, not somewhere impressive, but the sap itself is a completely different matter. The actual substance, the thing that becomes patience, becomes kindness, becomes a steadiness that holds when nothing around you is steady. That was never coming from the blade. It was always coming from the root, the same root this whole picture has been about, moving into whatever branch it reaches, no matter what that branch's history was going in. So do not let the cutting become a new ledger. Do not start counting how many times you have been pruned, not as if the number itself were proof. Proof you were finally becoming something. That would just be the old audit, wearing gardening clothes instead of religious ones, still watching, still scoring, still reading your own life for proof, only now with a blade in the picture, instead of a rope. The blade is not keeping score of you. It never was. It shows up when it shows up. It does what it does. It steps back. None of that timing was a message, not about how well you are doing. I am not going to give you a date for the fruit either. Same as I would not give you one. Not for the Bear Place closing. Not because I am holding it back to test you one more time. Because a date turns the growing into a performance. Something you would start managing. Instead of a life you get to actually live. You would watch the calendar the way you watch the knot. The way you watch the Bear Place. The way you have watched almost everything about your own life. Instead of simply living it. Instead of letting the root do what a root does. I'm not interested in adding one more thing for you to track. Here is what I'm interested in. You, resting in wood. Wood that is not waiting on your performance to decide whether it is real. You, letting the blade do its narrow job. Not turning it into a verdict. You, letting the root do what only the root can do. Turning sap into something worth the name. On its own timing. In its own way. The way it is done in every branch on this vine, since the very first one was ever grafted or grown. That is not a smaller life, not smaller than the one you have been trying to earn through checking. It is the same life, minus the checking, minus the ledger, minus the calendar you were never handed and kept building yourself anyway. You are not asked to know how much fruit is coming, or when, or in what shape you will finally recognize it as good. You are asked to stay where the root is, if that is even the right word for something this simple. Everything else was always going to happen the way growing things actually grow, quietly, underneath, on no schedule anyone handed you, needing none, because the current was not something you could generate or time in the first place. So come back now to where we started, to your own arm, to the years you spent running your hand down it, searching for a knot that was supposed to be somewhere along the length of it. Feel that memory again for a moment. All those mornings. All that quiet checking. Done so early and so often, you stopped noticing you were doing it at all. I am not telling you to stop noticing your own life. I am asking you to notice it differently. Not as an inspection. As a branch, in daylight, doing what wood does. Bending in the wind without breaking off. Drawing life it did not manufacture. Carrying fruit it did not force into being. You were built for that kind of noticing. Not the other kind. Not the kind that treats every quiet morning like a threat, every hard season like the one that might finally do it. There is no version of your story where I planted a vineyard, tended it with my own hands, and then handed you a piece of rope. Think about how strange that would actually be. Why would the one who cleared the hillside himself, stone by stone, turn around and tie a stranger onto the vine instead of growing one out of it? That was never the plan. It was never even a possibility inside the plan. You were grown, not tied. Whatever brought you here, whatever late arrival or old wound or borrowed fear taught you otherwise, none of it changed what you actually are, down in the grain. Underneath every anxious morning you have ever spent checking. You can put the inspection down now, not because the stakes were never real. They were. They are. The wind out there is real, and the seasons are hard, and I have not once told you otherwise. You can put it down because it was never the thing holding you here in the first place. The wood was holding you here. It has been holding you here since before you knew to be afraid of losing it. I know some of you hearing this are still bracing, still waiting for the catch, still running the audit one more time, out of habit even now, even with all of this laid out plainly in front of you. That is fine. Old habits do not break on command, not even a command from me. You do not have to trust this fully right now for it to already be true. It was true on the mornings you did not believe it. It stays true on the mornings after this one, whether the old checking fades slowly or all at once, or comes back for a while before it finally quiets down for good. Let that be the last thing you carry out of this. It is not a new task, and it is not a longer list of things to check instead of the old list. Just this, sitting quietly where the fear used to live. Look for the seam. There isn't one. There never was one, and there is not going to be one tomorrow. The hardest day still ahead of you will not grow one. Neither will the day you fail me worse than you have ever failed me before. Wood does not grow a seam because a branch had a bad season. You are not one storm away from becoming detachable. You were never that kind of thing to begin with. You are not going to become it now, no matter what this next stretch of your life ends up costing you to walk through. Rest in the wood, not in your grip on it. You were not really holding on at all, not in the way that mattered. Rest in what you actually are, continuous, grown, not fastened, carried by a life that was not borrowed, that was not going to run dry. It did not come from a source you could be cut off from to start with. That is not a comforting phrase for a hard week. That is what you are made of. Root to branch, no border in the middle, one piece of wood standing quietly in the light, whether or not you remembered to check anything at all. Amen. You stayed through a long search for something that was not there, and I am grateful for the kind of patience that takes. One small thing, if it is yours to give. The comments are open, and I would like to know the word you used for that seam, privately, before anyone told you it did not exist. Whatever you called it in your own head all that time, one word is plenty.